My name is Ranger Thomas Acker, badge 2903. I was stationed out of Roanoke, Virginia, and for over 2 decades I patrolled a section of the Appalachian Trail most folks never see on the postcards. They call it the Spine. Runs between Craig Creek and the Dragon's Tooth Formation. Some of the most beautiful trail you'll ever lay eyes on. Towering ridgelines, fog that moves like it's alive, pines that have been standing longer than most towns have existed. Hikers love it for its peace. But peace can be misleading. I used to believe that too. I really did. I started this job thinking it'd be quiet, a life of trail maintenance, visitor safety briefings, and the occasional search and rescue. What they don't tell you, and what the Park Service doesn't like being said on record, is that there are patterns, recurrences, things that should have never been allowed to fade from the reports, but somehow always do. I don't talk for effect. I'm not here to tell ghost stories. I'm telling you what happened, what continues to happen. I'm telling you what we were trained not to ask questions about. I first started noticing it back in '98. There was a case. An experienced hiker, mid-30s, Army vet. Guy's name was David Marin. He left a trail register at Need A Shelter around 11:40 a.m., stating he'd be pushing toward Pickle Branch that afternoon. Should have made it by dusk. He never arrived. We sent a search team out by dawn the next morning. Clear skies, good visibility, no sign of him. But something was off from the start. The trail still held his boot prints, singular straight-line pattern, for almost 7 miles, until they stopped. Not faded, stopped. No signs of a struggle, no secondary prints, no scuffle in the leaves, just one step, then nothing. You can explain that once, maybe twice. The wilderness is unpredictable, but over the years, it kept happening. Different sections, different hikers, same result, same vanishing point, tracks ending without reason. We'd log them, mark the sites, fill out the reports. Some got quietly reclassified, voluntary disappearance, or accidental drowning, even when no water was within miles. Others were closed entirely. You learn quickly which ones you're allowed to talk about and which ones are going to get buried. And that's what started to bother me, because I kept reading the logs, and when you read 1,000 of them, you begin to hear the same descriptions over and over again. A hiker complains of being followed by someone they never actually see. They hear voices calling to them, sometimes their own name even when they're alone. Shadows between trees that don't behave with the wind. Sudden quiet. Not peaceful. Total. Like every bird and bug just switched off. They always describe the same thing, and it always happens in the same windows, early spring or late fall, always in deep forest, and always where the undergrowth thickens enough to swallow sound. Some of those hikers make it back. Most don't, and the ones who do, well, they're never the same. One woman, Meredith Lane, 27, she was part of a Georgia group attempting a no-bow through hike in 2007, disappeared near the Virginia border. They found her 4 days later, barefoot, dehydrated, and crouched under a fallen tree 10 miles off trail. Her hands were shredded from climbing stone. She wouldn't speak at first, just stared. When she did, she kept asking about the other one. We never found anyone else. The rest of her group swore she left camp alone. No argument, no tension, just said she needed some air. I sat with her in the ranger station for nearly an hour trying to get a statement. She finally looked up and said, "It waits until you're just far enough that you can't call out. Then it calls your name, so you'll try." I'll never forget how flat her voice was. No fear, just certainty. Some stretches of that trail are old, older than this country, older than memory. There are petroglyphs in certain rock faces along the southern spine that don't match any known tribal carving in the area. We don't publicize those. The maps you download from the AT Conservancy don't show every landmark, and that's intentional. We've had people wander into things they weren't supposed to find. Old fire towers that were decommissioned in the 50s. Shelters that haven't been maintained in decades suddenly showing fresh logs in the registry, with dates no one remembers writing. And then there's what the dogs won't go near. When a K9 refuses to track, lies down instead of following a scent, we flag it, especially if the animal won't even enter the brush. There's a section just north of Dismal Falls where the dogs always stop, every time. Doesn't matter the handler, doesn't matter the case. The trail curves, the forest deepens, and the dogs stop. No barking, no growl, just complete refusal. One handler had to carry hers out. She wouldn't stop trembling. You want to know what the Park Service said? Probably a den, bear or coyote. Problem is, we checked. That ridge had no sign of a den. No prints, no scat, no nothing. Just silence. I started collecting the reports the department stopped archiving. They call it unofficial retention. We call it survival. Because when you start to see the same coordinates appear over and over, you realize the problem isn't isolated. It's embedded. There are zones along the Appalachian Trail we now call dead loops. Places where the land doesn't follow the same rules, where compasses sway and time bends, where people see campfires that vanish before they reach them, where voices mimic your family and aren't your family. And every single one of these zones has a footprint in the file room, a trace in the records. Someone tried to report it. Someone tried to warn others. And every time, the warning gets pulled. I'm retired now. No badge, no authority. But I've seen enough silence to last me a lifetime. I can't walk that trail anymore. Not because of my knees. Because I know what's waiting in the places we were told not to mark. And that's why I'm speaking now. To the hikers, the solo campers, the night walkers. You're not being paranoid. If the forest feels wrong, it probably is. If something tells you to turn around, listen. Because what happened to David Marin, to Meredith Lane, to the others, it wasn't coincidence. And what follows in this documentary, every location, every event, every reenactment is drawn from what they left behind. From logs, from search records, from footage they recovered. And some they didn't mean to. You're about to hear stories that were never supposed to leave the ranger stations. But they did. And now, they belong to all of us. This is the history of the Appalachian Trail you won't find in the guidebooks. And if you've ever walked its length alone, you might already know why. I logged it myself. August 12th, 1991. Just before 6 a.m., radio crackled in from the Devil's Fork section near the North Carolina line. The transmission was brief, garbled, half-static. A volunteer hiker coordinator out of Bear Wallow Gap had reported an empty camp, fire still burning, gear still there, but no people. I was pulled in the next morning as part of the auxiliary search crew. Even then, they weren't treating it as high priority. Said it was probably just a party group that had wandered off after dark. Happens more often than you'd think, until we reached the site. It was remote, tucked in near an unmaintained section just past Devil's Fork Gap, an area known to serious thru-hikers, but skipped by most casual visitors. The trail narrows there. Overgrowth presses in from both sides, and the canopy filters the sunlight down into something that feels off. Time feels heavier under those trees. We arrived at 9:12 a.m. on August 13th. 4 tents. One still zipped shut. Campfire was burned low, but embers still held heat. There were utensils still half buried in freeze-dried food, shoes neatly lined next to a rock. And no one, not a trace. No drag marks, no blood, no signs of a struggle. Every backpack accounted for. Radios still charged. Even their map sat out, open to a section they hadn't reached yet. The initial report said 5 hikers in total. Group of college students from Asheville. Last verified sighting was 3 days earlier at the Allen Gap resupply point. They'd planned a 40-mile loop and were halfway through when something went wrong. By the end of the first day, 3 counties had joined the search. Helicopters, dogs, volunteers. We combed every ridge, every water source. Nothing. And then, on day 3, things changed. A farmer out near Bakersville called in a sighting. Said a young man had stumbled out of the tree line barefoot, covered in cuts, bleeding from the hands. Wouldn't speak, just stood in the road, shaking. Sheriff's deputy got to him 12 minutes later. By then, he was curled in the ditch, unresponsive. They identified him by his belt. It had his name stitched into the leather, J. Parker, one of the 5. When they tried to interview him, he wouldn't talk, not even to his parents. Doctors ruled out head trauma. His scans came back clean, no drugs, no alcohol, nothing in the blood work. But his eyes, they wouldn't close. He just kept staring at the wall like he was waiting for something to come through it. I wasn't assigned to the hospital unit, but I sat in on the intake review. They said his feet were shredded. Looked like he'd walked nearly 50 miles through forest. His nails were cracked to the root. He had scratches all over his arms, some so deep they'd pulled bark from his skin. But it wasn't the injuries that stuck with me. It was the last thing he did say, just once, before he went silent for good. He whispered, "It sounded like me." There's an old story in that region. You won't find it written in any park archive or official report. Locals call it the Whistler. You hear about it from Appalachian families who've lived near the trail for generations. People who've lost uncles, cousins, kids in those woods and never found a trace. They say the Whistler doesn't show itself. It calls, it listens, it waits. And when it wants you, it uses your own voice. A woman from Flag Pond once told me that her brother went missing while hunting grouse in the same section back in '69. She said he radioed in before dusk, saying he was heading back to the truck. 40 minutes later, she heard his voice call her name from the opposite ridge, clear as day. Only thing was, she'd already found his body 10 minutes before. You want to know what the Park Service did with this one? They froze the case, reclassified it as an open search, never officially closed. No foul play suspected. The remaining hikers were marked as presumed lost due to disorientation. No mention of the voice, no mention of the campfire still warm, no mention of Parker walking nearly 50 miles barefoot with no memory of how. The report was sealed under Incident File 91 NCF 4482. I only kept a copy because I knew one of the responding medics. He said the same thing I was thinking. Something spooked him so bad. It erased him from the inside out. In the years that followed, we had more reports come in from Devil's Fork. Solo hikers hearing voices echoing up from the ravines, backpackers claiming someone was walking behind them. But when they turned, there was no one there. One guy said he kept hearing his daughter's voice, even though he knew she was home in Colorado. They always came out changed. Some didn't come out at all. This trail was built in 1937 to give people a way to reconnect with nature. What we didn't know, what no one could have predicted, is that some parts of nature want to stay hidden. Some places don't want your boots on their soil. Some places are still guarded. And sometimes, the trail calls back, not to welcome you, but to bring you in so you don't come back out. Narrator, closing this chapter. If you ever find yourself near Devil's Fork, and the woods fall completely quiet, If you hear your own voice calling from somewhere deeper in, don't answer it. Don't look toward it. And don't run. Just get out, step by step, eyes forward. Because whatever took Jay Parker and his friends, it never stopped. We've gathered every case the files tried to erase, every backlogged call, every unmarked disappearance, and they're just the beginning. Subscribe to MindFuel now, because we're not finished. Next up, the case that made the department change our field maps permanently. And if you've got your own story from the trail, send it in, because the forest remembers, and so do we. I've walked the Rhone Highlands more times than I can count, some of the highest elevations along the southern stretch of the Appalachian Trail, rolling balds, endless sky, fog like milk crawling low over the ridgelines. People travel from across the country just to camp there for a night. They call it breathtaking. But I've always felt something else there. Not peace, not fear exactly either. More like being watched from underneath. Back in 2004, a man named Kyle Bannister set out to solo hike from Carver's Gap up to Grassy Ridge Bald. 4-day trip. Amateur backpacker, 32 years old. His pack weight was too heavy, and his shelter setup wasn't great, but nothing unusual. He kept a paper trail journal, old school style, left dated entries at each shelter log he passed. The last log he ever wrote wasn't in a shelter. It was found inside his tent, zipped shut, along the northern slope of Jane Bald. It read, "Night 3. The rock beside my tent, it moved last night, that's all. Just that one line, no sign of struggle, no damage to the tent. His gear was still inside, pack untouched, sleeping bag was laid open, but Kyle was gone." We launched a search by dawn. High winds made drone scans useless. Ground teams fanned out across a 6-mile radius. For 5 days, nothing turned up. Then, on day 6, a trail runner from nearby Beach Mountain reported something unusual on the Appalachian Spur Trail, just west of Grassy Ridge. She said the trail had shifted, not eroded, shifted. When she'd hiked that segment 2 weeks before, a large split boulder sat on the east side of the trail. 2 pieces with a tree growing out between them. But now the boulder was sealed. No split, no tree. Just one massive rounded formation where there hadn't been one before. That might have been passed off as misremembering. Until we found his boot print, one print, half sunk into the soil beside that rock. Only one. No return step. We brought out geological survey gear, even asked local students from ETSU to test for sinkholes or recent slides. No seismic activity, no land movement. But our equipment couldn't get a clean read. Compasses spun. Subsurface sonar pinged irregular depths, like there were hollow chambers beneath the ridge. We tested 4 more locations along the Bald. Same results. Uneven density, moving air pockets, and faint vibrations that didn't register with any wind. I called it in as a geological anomaly, but then I heard from a volunteer who had manned the over-mountain shelter the week before. He told me this. At night, around 2 or 3 a.m., we hear knocking coming from inside the cliffs, like stone, answering itself. The Cherokee knew the Rhone Highlands before it had a name. Long before the trail was carved, before any European cabins were built on these ridges, the land had a purpose. Sacred in parts, feared in others. There are stories, quietly passed between local families, that certain places up there were used for burial. Not ordinary ones, not simple graves. They believed in spirits that lingered below the soil, that if disturbed, they could awaken. One story, told by an elder in Unicoi, claimed the highlands held what he called lungs of the earth, caverns that breathed. He said when the wind stops at night and the mist stays still, you can feel it. The land pulses, like something beneath is still alive, still waiting. Bannister's body was never found. No sign of animal attack, no sign he ever left his tent. But here's what stays with me. The rock described in his journal. There was a boulder less than 5 feet from where his tent had been pitched. It was flat on one side and warm to the touch, warmer than the surrounding soil. Even at 7 a.m., we logged it, photographed it, tried to mark it on the GPS, but the next time I returned, less than 72 hours later, it was gone. 2 years after that incident, a thru hiker named Elisa Kay submitted an anonymous statement through a ranger tip form. She had no connection to Bannister. She never mentioned him. But in her report, she said this: camped near Jane Bald. Ground kept rising and falling like something was crawling under it. Thought it was wind at first, then it started knocking from below. I packed up and hiked 5 miles in the dark to get away. Never reported it because I knew what they'd say. She was right. We can't explain knocking. We can't write up ground that moves when it shouldn't. And we can't tell hikers to avoid the Roan Highlands, because if we did that for every section where something strange has happened, the trail wouldn't exist anymore. But I kept copies of that report, just like I kept the journal entry, just like I kept Bannister's gear bag tucked in a storage unit long since unregistered. Because I don't believe the earth was just breathing. I think something under it was. If you ever camp in the highlands and feel the ground pulse beneath you, don't wait for it to happen again. Don't wait for the knock. Pack your things. Don't take the same trail back. And don't sleep near the stone clusters, especially the ones that feel warm. Whatever's underneath Roan Highlands, it's still moving. And Kyle Bannister may have been the one who got too close. We're just beginning to uncover what's been hidden along the trail for decades. You've only seen the surface. What comes next gets deeper. Subscribe to MindFuel. And if you've ever felt the earth move, when the wind was still, you might already know what's waiting underground. We'll be back next week. Same trail. New warning. You work the Appalachian Trail long enough, and patterns start to stand out. It's not just the disappearances. It's not just the static in the radios, the hikers who return changed, or the markers that move without a hand touching them. Sometimes it's what comes back, and sometimes it's what doesn't belong here anymore, but still walks. There's a stretch of trail in Shenandoah National Park that's always made the hairs on my neck stand up. Mile markers 51 through 59. It's a dense, twisting corridor lined with mountain laurel where the mist settles low and the sun never quite burns through the trees. And since at least 1987, reports have trickled in. Quietly, sporadically, usually written with hesitation. They all describe the same thing. 3 barefoot children, 2 boys and a girl, always together, always silent, always watching, and always dressed like they belong to another time. Button shirts, hand-stitched skirts, faded suspenders, like something out of an old photograph left too long in the sun. They're never seen running, never seen playing, never heard speaking, just standing, and then gone. The first official report came from a thru hiker named Diane Mercer, June 1987. She'd stopped near South River Falls to refill her water when she noticed movement on the ridge across the stream. 3 children, no gear, no adults, standing shoulder to shoulder behind a tree. She called out, thinking they were lost, but they didn't respond. She hiked over to check. By the time she reached the tree, they were gone. No movement, no footsteps running away. Just 3 sets of footprints, barefoot, not in dirt, but in ash. The ranger who took her statement said it was likely residue from a recent controlled burn. Only, there hadn't been one in that area in over a year. I wasn't stationed there at the time. But I transferred to Shenandoah in '94, and that's when I started hearing the stories firsthand. Not in meetings, not in incident reports, in whispers, among the rangers. There was a pattern. They always showed up in early morning or just before dark. They never interacted. They never left any sound behind. And they were always near places where other things had happened. Missing hikers, animal mutilations, hikers found disoriented, wandering without memory of how they got there. By 1996, I decided to look for them myself. It was early October. The leaves had just started to turn. I'd heard 2 separate hikers describe seeing the same trio on consecutive mornings near the Mill Prong Trail. Both accounts said the children were standing motionless behind a stone outcrop, staring toward the switchback. So I went out at 5 a.m., hiked the full stretch alone. Nothing on the trail, just fog. But near mile marker 53, I saw them. 3 figures, small, still, facing the trail from behind a grove of pine. I stopped, raised my hand, spoke clearly. "Hey, you kids all right?" Nothing. I took 1 step off the trail and they turned, not all at once, one by one, not in fear, just acknowledgement. Then they walked behind a tree. I closed the gap in less than 6 seconds. No one there, no footprints, except for 3 imprints, bare, small, blackened, burnt-looking, like they'd stepped out of a fire, not into it. I marked the coordinates, logged the prints, took a photo with my department-issued Polaroid. The next morning, the film was blank, just static gray, not overexposed, just wiped. I sent the camera in for maintenance. They never sent it back. You want to know the part that sticks with me? That week, a local maintenance worker out of Big Meadows called in a service ticket. He'd found soot-covered handprints all over the inside of the visitor center's glass display case. No entry signs. Alarm never tripped. And the handprints? Too small for an adult. Too high for a child to reach from the outside. The security footage? Corrupted. In 2001, a photo was posted to Reddit. It didn't get much attention back then, just a blurry image captioned, "Didn't bring kids." It was a fogged-up car window. On it, pressed into the condensation, were 4 small handprints. One of them was upside down. The photographer said she'd parked just off the Skyline Drive overlook, alone, and left her windows cracked while she hiked a nearby loop. Came back 40 minutes later to that. She thought it was a prank, until she realized the prints were on the inside. She'd locked her car. We've pulled dozens of hiker logs from the Shenandoah section, mentioning ghost kids, pioneer children, or the barefoot watchers. But they never linger. Sometimes hikers snap blurry shots of shadows. Other times, all they remember is the pressure, that feeling that someone is watching them, even when no one's there. Some describe sudden warmth, like standing too close to a campfire. Others hear giggling in the trees, but it never sounds joyful. It sounds rehearsed. I've spent my career hearing lies, exaggerations, hoaxes. But this pattern never stopped. From 1987 all the way to last year. Same trail, same 3 shapes, same silence. If you find yourself on the Shenandoah stretch and you see small figures watching from the trees, don't approach them, don't talk to them, and above all, don't follow them if they turn to walk away. They always lead deeper, and no one who's followed has come back with the same story. You've just heard one of the strangest recurring phenomena on the Appalachian Trail. But there are others. One's far more dangerous. Subscribe to MindFuel now, because is the one we weren't supposed to record. Next week, the Whisper Shelter recordings. Tapes recovered from a ranger's body camera, never released to the public. This isn't folklore. This is what's still happening, right now, and the trail isn't done speaking. We don't talk about this one much, not because it's rumor, not because it's exaggerated, but because even among those of us who've seen the worst the trail has to offer, this case never made sense, and we still don't have the language for what happened. It was the fall of 1974. The station was quiet. We had a dry season, fewer thru-hikers. The ridges up past Damascus were still changing colors. Late October, crisp mornings, brittle leaves underfoot. At 6:47 a.m., a man walked into the Ranger substation near White Top Mountain. No boots, no jacket. Blood soaked through his shirt, and what looked like a tarp was folded under his right arm, pressed tight against his ribs. Except it wasn't a tarp. It was skin, his own skin. His name was never made public, but we knew it later from the files. Harlan Reed, age 41, part-time maintenance contractor, Appalachian Trail volunteer coordinator for that section. Married, no history of mental illness, no previous medical issues. Familiar with the terrain. He'd gone out on October 23rd to repair an old lean-to structure near Elk Garden, alone. Had done it a dozen times before. When he walked into the station 3 days later, his scalp was exposed, muscle raw across his neck. Every inch of skin from the waist up had been removed, clean, bloodied, but methodical. There were no signs of tearing or trauma to the underlying tissue. It was as if he'd been peeled. He laid the skin gently on the table and said in a voice so calm it froze everyone in the room, "It gave this back to me." We rushed him to the nearest hospital. At the time, it was Mount Rogers Medical. He remained conscious during the entire transfer. No shock symptoms, no adrenaline crash. The paramedics said he kept repeating one phrase over and over. It needed a copy. It said it couldn't walk unless it wore me first. His vitals were stable. His nerves weren't damaged. And somehow he had walked 8 miles in that condition, through wooded terrain, in 30-degree temperatures, without shoes. The admitting nurse, Lisa Parnell, quit the next day. No notice, no forwarding address. She left her uniform in the locker and never came back. She never cashed her last paycheck. The hospital records were sealed within 48 hours. The report disappeared from the Regional Medical Index. When I tried to request a copy years later, after I'd heard whispers of the case, I was told flat out, that file doesn't exist. But some of us kept digging. And what we found, what some still believe, is that Harlan Reed didn't just survive something impossible. He encountered something ancient. There are stories, quiet ones, among some of the native communities in the region. Stories not often shared with outsiders. Stories about things that wear the skin of others. Not costumes, not disguises, copies, entities that need a human form in order to move through our world. But they don't kill you right away. They take what they need. And if they leave you breathing afterward, well, that's just the part no one believed could happen. Most stories end with the victim gone, missing, never found. But Harlan Reed came back. What we know is this. After 3 days in a quarantined recovery room, he vanished. Security footage, blank. Bed sensors, offline. Window locked from the inside. No sign of forced exit. But here's the part most people never heard. On the 4th night after he disappeared, a trucker pulled into a rest stop north of Asheville. Inside the men's bathroom, smeared on the mirror in blood, was one sentence. "I'm wearing him now." The blood matched Harlan Reed's DNA, but the fingerprints did not. The theory among those of us who've studied these cases is simple and terrifying. Whatever Reed encountered, it didn't just flay him. It replicated him. It used his body, his skin, as a pattern, as a doorway. And then it left. What's worse is this. The Ranger logs from that year, 6 months later, another man, a hiker out of Knoxville, was reported missing. His campsite was found fully intact, fire still warm, but the tent flap had blood on the inside. Folded neatly on top of his sleeping bag was skin, clean, dry, laid out like clothing, no body ever found. If you're hiking alone and you feel watched, but not followed, if you wake to find your tent unzipped, if the trees seem quieter than usual, and if something calls you by name in your own voice, you need to leave, you need to move, and you need to pray it hasn't already copied you. Because some things along this trail, they don't just take people, they replace them. There are case files the system deletes, logs that vanish from the archive, stories that end before the final page. MindFuel is where those stories live on. Subscribe now, because Chapter 5 pulls from the only footage recovered from a shelter they sealed shut after 2012. We're taught to look for movement in the woods. It's instinct. You trust what shifts in the brush. You scan for what shouldn't be standing still. But the real danger, what unsettles even the most seasoned rangers, is what never moves at all. The first report was filed in 1965. A hiker named George Calhoun, age 58, retired Navy, was traveling the Maryland Heights section of the Appalachian Trail. Just before dusk, he spotted a woman standing near a stone outcropping above the Potomac. She was barefoot, motionless, pale, dressed in white, no pack, no sound. He waved. She didn't respond. He called out. No answer. But she was looking at him, wide-eyed, blinking far too slowly, or not at all. When he got within 30 feet, he said the air changed, colder, still. And the further he moved toward her, the less real the trail felt. He took one step closer. She didn't flinch, didn't even breathe. But he said he heard his name. Only one problem: her mouth never moved. We've received nearly a dozen reports just like it over the years. Different hikers, different decades, but always the same woman, same white dress, same pale, unblinking stare. And the location? Never more than 2 miles outside Harper's Ferry. It became an unofficial joke among rangers, a ghost story we passed between night shifts and fire logs, but we stopped laughing in 2017. That's when a trail cam, placed illegally by a group of wildlife students from Shepherd University, captured something none of us were prepared for. It was a motion-triggered camera set on a buck path just off the main A-T corridor, pointed toward a clearing near Loudoun Heights. At 2:12 a.m., the sensor activated. A tall figure, female, white garment, facing away at first, standing perfectly still. Then, she began to turn. Not suddenly, not naturally, just pivoting, in slow degrees. No shifting of the legs, no swing of the arms, just her torso rotating as if she weren't jointed like us. When she faced the lens fully, her eyes were wide, open, reflective. She never blinked, not once. For 12 full minutes, the camera caught every frame. Then, at 2:24 a.m., the feed cut, though the battery had another 3 days of life, and the memory card was only 11% full. When the students retrieved it, they assumed it was a glitch, until they looked at the metadata. The camera hadn't malfunctioned. Something had stopped it. The footage was never released publicly. But I've seen it. The eyes aren't what haunt me. It's what came after. 3 days later, one of those students, Jason H., age 22, checked himself into a mental health facility near Martinsburg. He claimed he hadn't slept in 48 hours. He said every time he closed his eyes, she was standing over his bed, watching, never speaking, never blinking. He described a pressure in his chest, like her gaze was pushing something into him, not a feeling of being watched, but being read. His chart notes said the word he used was scanned. He said he hadn't dreamed about anything else since they recovered the camera. And when they finally sedated him, He whispered, just before he went under. "She's not from here." The park tried to chalk it up to trauma. Too much stress, sleep deprivation, textbook, except now the sightings are more frequent, more current. We had a thru hiker in 2021 submit a report to the Conservancy anonymously. He said he saw a woman off trail just south of the Shenandoah River crossing. No pack, no shoes. She was pale, barefoot, and facing the wrong direction, into the tree line. He said it didn't feel like he saw her. It felt like she let him see her. And when he blinked, she was suddenly 5 feet closer. No sound, no shift in leaves, no footprints. He quit the trail the next day, 980 miles short of Katahdin. His final logbook entry? "She's closer when I blink." There's no official file for this case. You won't find any name for her. No coroner's report, no photos in the archive. Just a sequence of overlapping reports going back nearly 60 years, all tied to a stretch of trail so popular we couldn't close it even if we tried. But here's what I know. She never blinks. She never speaks. And she's never once been seen walking, only waiting, only watching. And every person who's seen her feels her again in their dreams. So if you're walking through Harper's Ferry and you feel the weight of eyes on you from the brush, don't look, don't stop. And whatever you do, don't blink back. She's not lost. She's searching, and she doesn't need to follow you home. You bring her with you just by seeing her. We've uncovered dozens of stories the Park Service has quietly let die, but they don't stay buried. They echo, they watch. Subscribe to MindFuel to follow every chapter, because chapter 6 is next. A locked shelter, a journal smeared in blood, and audio no ranger ever wanted to hear again. Don't look away, the trail remembers. Fire towers were built to see further than the smoke, to warn, to watch, to give rangers the edge against what creeps in unnoticed. But not everything you see from up there is meant to be seen. And once you see it, whatever it is, it might see you back. It was September 12th, 1998, a Sunday. Sunrise came with low clouds and cold air pushing in from the west. I wasn't on duty that day, but I remember the weather. I remember the sky not clearing, just thinning, like fog was pressed up against the world. At 5:19 a.m., a 911 call came in from Clingman's Dome Lookout, an old fire tower on the Tennessee side. The structure was remote, steel-framed, elevation over 6,600 feet, one of the few that still had full-time seasonal staffing back then. The ranger on shift that morning was Daniel Boyd, 33 years old, 4 years in service. A good man, level-headed, no prior incidents. Here's the transcript of that call. It's been sealed for over 2 decades, but some of us kept copies. 911 operator. 911, what's your emergency? Daniel Boyd, Ranger. This is Ranger Boyd. I'm at Clingman's Dome Lookout. I've got a situation. Operator. Go ahead. Boyd. There's a hiker out there, just below the ridgeline, but something's off. Operator. Injured? Boyd. No, he's standing still, watching the tower. But when I called down to him, he repeated it, word for word. Operator. You mean he responded? Boyd. No, not responded. Copied. Same tone, same volume, same voice. Mine. Boyd reported that the figure mimicked every phrase he spoke, several seconds after each line. When he asked, "Are you lost?" the voice came back, "Are you lost?" But there was a delay, like it had to hear first, like it couldn't speak until he gave it the words. And then something changed. He tried calling in on the department radio. Dead air. He tried the tower's loudspeaker. It buzzed, then cut out entirely, but the voice below kept going, repeating things Boyd hadn't said aloud. Boyd. It's saying things I'm thinking now. I'm not talking. I'm just thinking. And it's saying them. Operator. Ranger Boyd. Can you confirm you're alone in the tower? Boyd. I was. Operator. Excuse me? Boyd. It's in the tower now. Operator. Say again? Boyd, whispering. It's in the tower now. Call ends. 6 minutes, 42 seconds. Final sound, a long breath, but not Boyd's. Search teams arrived 2 hours later. The tower was empty. Boyd was never found. No blood, no torn gear, no damage to the structure. But the upper hatch was closed from the inside, locked, and there were footprints on the steel steps, bare, not just barefoot, but longer than human feet, as if something had shaped itself into a man and missed the dimensions just slightly. The official report filed the next week cited extreme fatigue-induced confusion as a factor in Boyd's disappearance. Structural integrity was cited as the reason for closing the tower. A year later, the entire tower was dismantled and removed by helicopter. No ceremony, no memorial, just gone. But some of us knew why. There'd been sightings before. Off-duty rangers reporting movement in the treetops, unexplained echoes, voices that sounded too familiar. And after Boyd, the stories got louder. One volunteer who hiked that ridge in 2001 said he kept hearing his own voice, begging for help, from behind trees he hadn't passed yet. He said it made him feel like he was following himself. Here's the theory, quietly whispered among the senior staff, passed down through the years. There's something out here. Not a creature, not a person. An echo that isn't just sound. It hears you, copies you, and once it knows your voice, it climbs. Not just the tower, but inside your thinking. It doesn't knock, it waits. And when it gets close enough, it finishes your sentence before you do. If you're ever hiking near Klingman's Dome and you hear a voice call up to you in your voice, don't respond. Don't ask who it is. Don't finish the sentence, because once it hears you clearly, once it matches your breath and rhythm, it doesn't need you anymore. You've already given it what it needs. And by the time you hear the whisper behind you, you'll already be speaking with its mouth. They sealed the tower. They buried the tape. But the signal still echoes. Subscribe to MindFuel, because Chapter 7 takes us further south, where the trail gets steep, and something underground isn't sleeping anymore. Based on ranger excavation notes and a sealed maintenance report from 1983. Keep walking, but don't trust your echo. We tell hikers not to go off trail for a reason. It's not about safety, it's not about preservation, it's about territory. There are places in these woods that haven't changed in thousands of years. Not in sound, not in shape, not in hunger, and some places should stay untouched. The incident started with a single post, October 2014. A backcountry hiker named Marcus Vale, 27 years old, uploaded a video entry to a regional hiking forum. No dramatics, no edits. Just a handheld clip, shaky and wind-bitten. He's pointing at a tree, large, twisted, midway up a slope near the Tennessee side of the Smokies, off any mapped trail by at least 2 miles. The tree was dead, hollowed out at the base, but the opening wasn't shaped like decay. It was shaped like a mouth, a long, rounded oval, wide, not tall, jagged grooves along the bark that almost looked like teeth. In the video, Marcus says, "There's something inside it. I thought it was wind, but it's not. It sounds wet, and it's been growling. It stopped when I got closer." He left a GoPro pointed directly into the hollow, overnight, secured with a tripod. He slept in a hammock 20 feet upwind. He never saw anything. But what he heard, what the GoPro recorded, changed everything. He posted again 2 days later. This time, no video, just a few grainy photos and one line of text. I found the camera this morning. It was cracked, clean in half. The plastic looks chewed. What little data survived was uploaded by a Reddit user known only as @SpiritFrame, a sound engineer who pulled the corrupted audio and slowed it to half speed. What they uncovered was brief, 12 seconds, low static, a wet, rhythmic sound, almost like breathing through water. And then, a whisper, distorted, close to the mic, but unmistakable. It said, Marcus Vale, clear, deliberate. As if something in that tree knew his name, and Marcus never once said it aloud in any recording, not on camera, not on site. That clip has since vanished from most platforms, but I heard it. And so did at least 3 other rangers I know personally. One of them, Calderon, out of the Cades Cove Post, quit within a month of reviewing it. He left a note in his locker that said, "If it knows your name, it already knows your path." He didn't request reassignment. He didn't request retirement. He just left. Locals near that section of forest have their own stories. They don't use scientific terms. They don't argue about biology or camera lenses. They say that stretch of land is Wendigo territory, not folklore, not metaphor. They speak in low tones about a thing that hunts not by scent, but by memory, by thought. They say it lingers in the cold months, that it stays near dead things, trees, animals, people, and waits, not for food, but for recognition. Marcus Vale never posted again after that entry. Search teams went in a week later, no sign of him, just the tripod, snapped at the base, and drag marks, not footprints. Marks in the moss leading toward the tree, not away. The tree itself? It had changed. The hollow opening was no longer wide. It had narrowed, tightened, and the bark that looked like teeth had curled inward, almost like it had closed its mouth. If you find yourself off trail, if you feel the temperature drop in a patch of still air, if you hear breathing that doesn't match your own, don't turn to look for it. Don't speak your name aloud. And whatever you do, don't shine your light into the hollow. Because some things out here aren't asleep. They're just waiting for you to speak. We've uncovered footprints that don't walk, voices that copy what you haven't yet said. And now, things that watch without eyes. Subscribe to MindFuel now. Because Chapter 8 takes us deeper into the Carolina Ridges, where an entire shelter was removed after one night, and every photo taken inside, it came back blurred, except one. Keep moving, because the forest knows when you stop. The Appalachian Trail is mapped. It's documented, measured, updated annually. It's one of the most surveilled natural corridors in North America, but it only takes one stretch of silence, one moment where the satellites stop listening, for something to erase you. And in the summer of 2013, that's exactly what happened. June 14th, 3 hikers, Emily Rhodes, 26, Jordan Fenn, 27, and Derek Holt, 25, were 4 weeks into a full northbound through hike. They were experienced, well-equipped, and logged every stop with GPS photos, videos, and pinned map locations on a shared cloud drive. The section they vanished in, near McAfee Knob, Virginia, a high-traffic zone with stable signal. Dozens of hikers passed through daily. Weather was clear. No storms, no rockfalls, no alerts. At 2:43 p.m., Jordan sent the final text. Taking a weird detour Derek spotted. Off trail, but looks safe. See you at the shelter. They never arrived. Their phones were found 3 days later by another hiker, sealed in a plastic food bag, half buried under a cairn beside the trail. Still charged, still recording. And every phone contained footage. But none of it explained what happened. Emily's phone had a 43-second video. She's filming Derek walking ahead through thick brush. They're laughing, joking about taking a shortcut to nowhere. Then the footage stutters. A crack of static. And then total silence. Except for one frame, the final one. A dark clearing, no people, no trees visible, just a single glowing eye, white, featureless, hovering mid-frame. No face, no body, just that eye. Same frame appeared on Jordan's phone, and Derek's. 3 different devices, same exact final image. The FBI stepped in by day 5. They sealed the area, interviewed local rangers, including myself. They confiscated the phones, issued a statement to the families. Still under investigation, no conclusive findings. But unofficially, we heard the agents wouldn't stay past dusk. We heard their radios kept looping, echoing the last word spoken in any open channel. Not in a garbled way, perfectly clear, and always ending in someone else's voice. The forums picked it up within a month. Reddit threads, podcasts, wild theories. One post stood out. A user named @Rattletap claimed he worked with a private company maintaining backup GPS nodes and trail beacons across the eastern corridor. He wrote, "There's a stretch south of McAfee where the signal's never right. Doesn't bounce. It bends, like something draws it in, then doesn't give it back." Another user asked if it could be magnetic interference. He replied, "Not magnetic, not topographic. It's like the satellites. Forget that part exists." The thread was deleted hours later. His account? Suspended. One ranger, retired now, told me something I can't forget. He'd been on a search team during the first week, said the woods felt too still. Birdsong stopped halfway into the brush. Batteries drained faster than usual. His watch began to lag, then jump ahead by minutes. He swore. He heard someone whisper his name from above him, not from the trees, from the sky. Here's what no one said on the record. There were no drag marks, no signs of struggle, no blood, just 3 hikers, gone, and 3 separate devices, on 3 different people, somehow ending on the exact same frame. The eye. No reflection, no iris, no blink, just a cold, white oval. Staring. We've all heard of hikers getting lost, falling, wandering too far, but this wasn't a fall. This wasn't confusion. This was a section of trail that took something and left one message behind. It sees you. It always did. We've tracked shadows in the trees. We've heard whispers from towers long abandoned. And now, we've seen the eye that watches from the dark. Subscribe to MindFuel now. Because Chapter 9 brings us to the wettest, most remote stretch of the trail, where a ranger cabin flooded from the inside, and what was found sealed behind the floorboards wasn't human. Next, the cabin that wept. Keep your light on. The trail hasn't blinked yet. Sometimes, the last thing a person says is all the proof we get. No prints, no blood, just words, recorded in real time, then cut off. And what makes this case different is that you can still hear them for yourself, if you know where to look. April 3rd, 2022. The hiker went by the username Juno Atlas. Real name never confirmed. Male, mid-30s. An ultralight solo hiker broadcasting his northbound through-hike live, step by step, from Springer Mountain toward Katahdin. His stream had been gaining traction. Nothing flashy, just raw, day-by-day footage, dense fog, long silences, rations in a bear canister. But people watched. Not for entertainment, but because something felt off. He talked less and less. Started muting the mic at night. Viewers noticed his face changing, hollowing, not from exhaustion, but from something else. On day 28, somewhere near the state border, his signal came online in the early hours of the morning. The camera was chest level, his voice low, And what he said in the final 2 minutes still has people divided. Exact transcript from his final live stream. I know I shouldn't have gone off the ridge, but I kept hearing. It's like someone's walking the trail with me, but just barely out of step. I never see them, never hear them clearly, but I feel it. Not like I'm being followed. More like I'm walking a path that already belongs to something else. Something old. Older than the trees. Older than this mountain. I think it's watching me through things. Not from behind, from under, and I can't turn around. I won't. Because I think it's behind me now. Then, static. The camera doesn't fall. No sound of movement. Just black screen, as if something passed in front of the lens and stayed there. The stream held for 6 more hours. Blank screen. Dead audio. It drew 47,000 viewers before the feed was removed. The channel deleted within the day. IP traces erased. Name never verified. No official missing person report. Just a 19-character string of data, recovered by archival accounts, listed as last known Juno vid. You can still find pieces of it, if you're fast, but they disappear as quickly as they're posted, like something is scrubbing it away. Some say it was a hoax, viral marketing, a horror stunt. But here's what I know. We received an anonymous tip, GPS coordinates, on April 7th. It led to a collapsed deer blind near the marked trail. Inside was a phone, same model Juno used, no SIM, no SD card, but etched into the back panel by fingernail or blade were 5 words: I walked where it sleeps. The trail has no lights, no exit signs, no warnings for what watches without eyes, but every so often, it lets someone speak, long enough to warn the rest of us. So if you're ever hiking through silence, not quiet, but hollow silence, and you feel the air press against your back like breath, keep walking, and don't turn around. He said something walks this trail that was here before us, that it doesn't chase, it waits until you speak it aloud. Subscribe to MindFuel and follow this trail all the way to its darkest mile. Because Chapter 10 brings us to the end. A ranger's final entry. A report never meant to be read, and something wearing the wrong face, knocking on a forest door. Next, final ranger report, it wears the lost. 1 more mile, and it's waiting there. The Appalachian Trail stretches more than 2,000 miles, from Georgia's soft pine ridges to the granite-boned summit of Mount Katahdin, a path shaped by time, weather, and the footsteps of millions. It was meant to bring peace, to connect, to offer stillness for those searching. But stillness isn't always quiet, and connection can go both ways. Since 1970, there have been over 54 recorded disappearances on or near this trail that remain unresolved. Not all vanished forever, but left no trail behind. No gear, no footprints, just silence. Of those, 13 were classified as extreme exposure, but here's what doesn't add up. No signs of frostbite, no dehydration, no storm, no bodies, just vanishing. In clear weather, on well-marked ground. I've read the internal files, I've seen the redacted pages, and if you know the old terminals and the right access strings, you'll find something unexpected. Lines buried deep in archived memos, buried under jargon and bureaucratic smoke, but clear enough for those of us who've seen what's out there. Event may indicate non-human interference. Continue to monitor. Field agent recommends no further investigation. Risk exceeds threshold. Subject appeared altered. Memory degradation not consistent with known conditions. They'll never say what we say. They won't write what we've whispered between ranger outposts for years. But we know. Because the trail, it isn't just land, it's memory. It records, it keeps, it waits. We've seen hikers forget their names for hours only to remember them in someone else's voice. We've found boot prints that ended mid-stride. We've heard things at night we still don't talk about. Not because we're afraid to sound crazy, but because we don't want it to remember us too clearly. This trail was carved long before maps, before rangers, before towns, before the first name was ever spoken aloud into the trees. And some say, it listens, step by step, mile by mile. It listens to your breath, your fear, your doubt. And sometimes, it decides. For every lost signal, for every last word spoken before the dark, for every pair of eyes that never blinked again, subscribe to MindFuel. These are only the stories we can tell, because somewhere out there, past the next ridge, beyond the mist, the trail remembers. And it's not done walking.